Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, are more than buzzwords. These policies have shaped corporate hiring, training, marketing strategies across North America and beyond. But a new trend is taking hold. Major companies like Amazon, Meta, Ford are rolling back their DEI programs, calling them outdated or a costly business strategy that no longer fits in a shifting political climate. On Monday, President Donald Trump issued an executive order ending what he calls, quote, radical and wasteful government DEI programs and preferencing.
I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based.
Well, he's since gone a step further and has directed all federal DEI employees to be put on leave and eventually be laid off. So what does this all mean? And are we seeing the same sort of backlash in Canada? We'll hear from people who work in the DEI field about what they're seeing. And we want to hear from you, too. What's your take on the rollback of diversity programs? You can give us a call today, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Our guests today have extensive experience in the areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're prepared to answer any questions you may have today. Abdur Rehman Ahmad has more than 10 years of DEI experience. He's currently at the U of S, but today he's not speaking on behalf of the university. He's bringing his years of expertise to this conversation, and he is with me here in our Saskatoon studio. Welcome to the show, Abdur.
Thank you so much for the invitation and really looking forward to the discussion.
Me too.
It's a cold day, but we're going to have some warm discussions.
I love that. Tynan Allan of Culturing, am I saying that correctly, Tynan? Culturing has more than a decade of experience working with leaders in human resources and DEI. He now lives in Regina, and he's joining us from our studio there. Tynan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So good to have you. And then Kelly Cooper, who's founder and president of Social Intelligence, Inc. She works extensively with workplaces that are looking to create more inclusive job sites. She's in Ontario, but has experience working with some companies here in Saskatchewan. And she is joining us via Google Meets today. Kelly, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. This
will be an interesting one. And I know we've got a lot to get into when it comes to the backlash that we're seeing right now, but I just want to make sure that our listeners have that I have a full understanding of what DEI was meant to do and sort of where it comes from. And, you know, I've even been going back and forth between DEI, EDI. I don't know what you use or if it matters, but Tynan, maybe I'll start with you. When we mention DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, what are we talking about?
Well, working in this profession, and I saw it coming, but I don't think I saw it coming as in full force as it has been in the first, 20-something days of the new year, coming from the mouth of the president, large corporations. When I started doing this work, it was something that we talked about here and there, but by no means did I ever even think that Donald Trump would know what that meant. I'm glad, in a sense, that he does know what it is, but I think he's been quite misinformed about what it is. And so, a lot of what we look at in terms of DEI, where it comes from, is it comes as a way to correct so many of the disparities that have been created, that have been mandated by governments, that have been, mandated by corporations. When we think back to Jim Crow era, when we think in Canadian history of many things with residential schools, with the Indian Act, all of these things have repercussions all the way to today. And that impacts people at work, and it impacts people when they're getting hired. And so a lot of the work that we do within DEI encompasses that. A lot of what it doesn't encompass is giving people jobs just because they have a certain ethnicity or gender. That almost never happens. And it's so interesting to see how that narrative is the one that kind of rises itself to the top because people fear that it means that things are unfair. But really, the whole point of DEI is about finding fairness and correcting things that are unfair, not giving people, unmerited, things that they haven't earned or things that they aren't qualified to do, giving them the jobs to do those things. And I think there's a really strong argument to say that Donald Trump has actually been one of those people that has given people jobs without, having the qualifications to do so.
Interesting. Kelly, what would you add to that? What would be your definition of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs?
Well, building off of what Tynan said, I mean, this has been going on forever, but I would say a good place for people to have some positioning on this whole topic is back to the late 80s with a book that came out called Our Common Future. And it was all about United Nations member countries coming together and discussing sustainable development goals, of which there's an environment component and there are social issues that we are facing. For the last 30 years, we've been focusing on the environmental issues, climate change, forestry degradation, land degradation, all the environmental buzzwords that you talk about and hear about.
I think we just lost Kelly.
In recent times, there's been a push toward social issues. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. So in the last, I would say, 10 years or so, there's been an awareness, an awakening on addressing the social issues, those sustainable development goals that include gender inequality and reduced inequalities. And so that's going from the UN and what they talked about and drilling it down to the boardrooms and then trying to implement it with actions within the workplace culture. And when we talk about it, as Tynan said, it's not about quotas. I hate it when people talk quotas. It's an embarrassing thing for people of different genders or race to be identified with that. I think that's horrible. It's more about diversity of thoughts, diversity of ideas. I don't know if you have this in your household, but I certainly think differently than my husband. And I solve problems differently. And you know what? When we come together, we can find a solution that makes a lot more sense. It's grounded in more thinking and more troubleshooting. Ultimately, these are the things that we want in business as well. We want better performance. We want less retention, turnover. We want all these things that create better business outcomes. And by having diversity of thought in decision-making roles, we achieve that.
Before we get Abdur's perspective on it, Kelly, I just want you to share with people, explain the types of industries that you've worked with, because I think it's interesting to hear a bit more about how you've been trying to influence different sectors. So mining, forestry.
I heard a university degree in environmental science from U of T from the late 80s, early 90s. And with that, I walked into the engineering world as well as all male dominated sectors. But with this work, I specifically targeted the STEM sectors, and mining and forestry are the two key ones that I've drilled into in the last 12 years. A ton of work to do there.
Yeah, what's that like? What are those, what kind of state are those industries in? And when you come in and you're trying to get people thinking about inclusion, equity, diversity, gender, how does that go over?
Well, it's been a challenge. I mean, I have to be clear, I started my work under the Harper era, so it was a conservative agenda. And it was about promoting women into senior executive roles and in technical positions in the mining sector. And I did that on a Women in Mining National Action Plan, where we identified barriers and we provided tools and approaches on how to address those barriers. The forest sector approached me after that, and I had learned on what I did in mining, and now in the Liberal government era, different context. But then I went on a sector-wide basis and really moved into action with what I could do. So if you go to Free to Grow and Forestry initiative, you'll see everything that's been created. It started in 2018, still going on. I received a tremendous amount of pushback. This is one of the most traditional male-dominated sectors we have in Canada on this topic. I would say it's behind the mining sector on this topic. So I received a ton of pushback. In spite of that resistance, I've managed to create training modules that really effectively meet the audience where they're at, because that's part of this whole discussion. We're giving a lot of things to people too quickly, and we need to do it in a way that empathizes with what's going on with our audience and explains to them the logic, the financial aspects, which we don't always want to start with, but we have to, again, meet our audience where we're at, and then guide them through how to affect change in their organization that makes sense on all levels for them as well. And I did that through, in 2020, I wrote a book called Lead the Change, The Competitive Advantage of Gender Diversity and Inclusion. And that really was targeting the C-suite on why they need to pay attention and then how to go about it. It gives them a blueprint for how to take action. And that book has been very effective in waking up that sector. And like everybody's been using that book as a reference now in the sector, which is great. So I would say it's going through like a change management approach, which we do with IT. So map that onto this social issue. We have to create awareness, create that desire to make a change, give them the knowledge and the skills to do it, and give them the recognition and like keep it rolling. Like we have, it's a continuous process.
I want to ask you more follow-up questions because it feels like we're in a moment where some of that could be at risk now, very much so. I know we're not the United States, but this is part of the conversation today, so we'll get to that. But Abdur, I want to hear from you, and I know you have reasons why you work in this sector. But just first off, how would you define it, and why are you so passionate about it?
Well, first of all, it was really amazing to listen to Tynan and Callie. I don't think I can add much more to the definition, but my definition of EDI, even though before when I landed in Saskatoon, that was the time when I was given the definition of Saskatoon.
How long ago was that?
This was in 2012, October 2012. Yeah. And this is how I experienced EDI and the value and the perception I was given that. I landed in Saskatoon with my family, jet lagged, no idea of the city, no connection with the land and the people, but the lady there who took us in her house, I still remember at midnight, she opened her arms for me. She didn't know who I was, but she represented a few things. She represented that we're going to do this together. You come from a different background. We're going to be sharing vulnerabilities. We're going to be establishing trust also. You're going to be contributing to the community, to the Saskatoon community. We're going to be taking care of each other. We're going to be establishing trust, relationship, love, and also respect for each other. And we're going to do it together. And we're going to create a sense of belonging, not only for you, but for everybody else. You're embracing the opportunities of Saskatoon, the treaty territory you live on, and you're also embracing the challenges and the history of this land. So we are going to do this together. And that is the definition of EDI for me.
That captures it perfectly.
Thank you.
Abdur, do you feel like how challenging do you think this moment is? What is the ripple effect of what we're seeing in the United States to a place like here in Saskatchewan?
I think, there are many ways to look at it. Sometimes when you see this kind of ripple effect, you also have to remind yourself maybe you were doing something really good and really, really the right way, and there is this kind of, reaction coming from with full force. It comes from a lack of understanding and fear also. So the EDI work in terms of there's a huge history of the rights also, the racism and the colonization. This work has been existing for the last 80 years, since 1960s and 70s also, because end of the day, if we as a nation, as a community, we want to progress, we want to develop further also, economy, the livelihood, the belonging, and the community health, all is important. And EDI is kind of makes you reflect and think about what are the gaps, what are the needs of the people also. So there is definitely this ripple effect, but we have seen over the years, there's always that pushback, but we always come back to the basics because people need that, that sense of belonging, that sense of connection with each other also. They need the psychological safety in the workplaces also. The challenge with EDI work is also, it's not for everyone. If as an organization, as a community, you do not have the trust, that relationship with each other also, you can put any change, any innovation, any creativity is going to get a pushback. So many times it's not the problem is the EDI, it's the lack of that, that organization. And, it's the same question, how many organizations can really thrive and survive in the future also? This is about our collective future and our belonging also. So many times, this is my different take on it, that if as an organization, you're not a great place to work for women, then you're not a great place to work for anybody else also.
Tynan, what do you read into this moment? What do you think the ripple effect might be on Saskatchewan when we're hearing this kind of rhetoric from President Trump?
I think people from Saskatchewan, and I grew up here. I haven't lived here for the last 14 years, but I did grow up here, spent 18 years. And what I know about people from Saskatchewan is that they're wholesome and that they care about other people. But also, they can often feel a little bit, and especially when I grew up here, it can feel a bit uniform. And so one of the things that I hope that we can take from, this is that, we are actually made better when we are less uniform, when we're more diverse, when there are people that bring into our spaces, into our communities, things that we didn't have before that we wouldn't have known of before. And I think a perfect example of that is like how many times do we go to a workplace and you grew up in the north end of a city and I grew up in the south end of the city and we bring something different to the table. Or similarly, you know, myself and Kelly, we kind of came out of the gate with some facts and hard-hitting ideas. And my other colleague, I believe it's Abdur, you came in with a story. And you calmed things down in a way that Kelly and I weren't able to do based on our cultural backgrounds. And you brought something different. That's exactly, our little interview here is a microcosm of everywhere we go, of our workplaces, of our, experiences at, on parent councils, things like that. And so, yes, maybe the ripple effect might be a knee-jerk reaction, and some corporations might come out and say, hey, we're also going to, remove these policies that we had in place or things like that. I don't doubt that some places in Canada will follow suit in the US, as that's always what happens. But what DEI often is not the specific policy of, hey, we're going to have a quota and hire this many Black people tomorrow or by 2027, something like that. That happens, but it's very rare, and it's becoming less common. What is more common is that we go in and we recognize, hey, like, why is it that, for example, in Canada, we have only of racialized folks a representation of 4.5% among corporate boards. What's happening when we're seeking out corporate board members? Is there really no one that's from a racialized background that's applying for these positions? Is it really that none of them are qualified? That's a pretty hard argument to make. But what's an interesting argument or an interesting thing to look at is how are we maybe assessing? How are we maybe, we have a job interview and maybe somebody like Abdur comes in and shares a story, and our bias and our, we were wanting them to have stats, but we didn't tell them that. And so then now they're maybe graded lower in a job interview, and they're seen as, less hireable when they weren't from a dominant culture and didn't understand our norms, or, women communicate differently, or things like that. Those are really the things that we're trying to get at, is when we look at disparities, like we see that only, 29% of board positions are held by women. Well, that's not even close to the Canadian proportion of women. So what's happening? Why are women still not in these roles? It's more likely not because we're just not hiring them on a quota, but because we're not really diving into difference and diving into our understanding of how to actually see people the way they need to be seen.
Tynan, I think you did a really good job there of setting the table for an open conversation. And so thinking of everyone listening, this is really an opportunity for learning. I think this is an example of we're trying to have a tough conversation here, and Blue Sky is a great place to do that. So we do want to hear from folks today. We'd like your questions about DEI programs and your take on the rollback of some diversity programs. You can call us 1-800-716-2221. You can also email us bluesky@cbc.ca. I just want to share some of the interview that Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Meta, did with Joe Rogan on Joe Rogan's Experience podcast, because we're talking about some pretty big companies who are shifting here, companies that have a lot of influence. I don't know anybody. Well, there's a few people I know, but most people have a Facebook account. So this does affect people in Saskatchewan in some ways. And so that company sent out this memo, and it said that it would continue to search for job candidates with different backgrounds, but stop using a, quote, diverse slate approach, which I'm not entirely sure what that means. It also said Meta would no longer have a dedicated team focused on DEI. So I just want to share part of that conversation that brings up masculinity in the workplace. Let's listen.
If you're a woman going into a company, it probably feels like it's too masculine. It's like there isn't enough of the kind of the energy that you may naturally have, and it probably feels like there are all these things that are set up that are biased against you, and that's not good either, because you want women to be able to succeed and like have companies that can unlock all the value from having great people, no matter what their background or gender. So, but I think these things can always go a little far, and I think it's one thing to say we want to be kind of like welcoming and make a good environment for everyone. And I think it's another to basically say that masculinity is bad. And I just think we kind of swung culturally to that part of the kind of the spectrum where, you know, it's all like, okay, masculinity is toxic. We have to like get rid of it completely. It's like, no, like it's both of these things are good, right? It's like you want like feminine energy, you want masculine energy. Like I think that's like you're going to have parts of society that have more of one or the other. I think that's all good, but I do think the corporate culture sort of had swung towards being this somewhat more neutered thing. And I didn't really feel that until I got involved in martial arts, which I think is still a much more masculine culture. And so, and not that it doesn't try to be inclusive in its own way, but I think that there's just a lot more of that energy there. And I just kind of realized it's like, oh, this is
that's
like,
how you become successful at martial arts. You have to be at least somewhat aggressive.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, there are like a few of these things throughout your life where you have an experience and you're like, where has this been my whole life? And it just like,
Yeah.
it just turned on like a part of my brain that I was like, okay,
Yeah.
like this was a piece of the puzzle that should have been there. And I'm glad it now is.
That's Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg speaking with Joe Rogan on his podcast. Kelly, I mean, there was a lot there. That whole conversation was actually 3 hours or something like that. So that's just a piece. But what are some of your initial thoughts? What do you read into kind of what Mark Zuckerberg's getting at there?
Well, I'll start with saying nobody's looking to neuter the male gender here in the corporate world. That's not what we're trying to do at all. We're trying to improve the corporate world by having, as I said before, diversity of thinking to strengthen outcomes, to strengthen ideas and innovative approaches to doing things. I appreciate the martial art reference because I actually use that in the training because I know the training's really built for guys who are struggling with understanding this whole topic and knowing how to operate in the workplace that will be effective and not really chop off their toes as they're feeling it. And in the martial arts context, I talk about being a silent ninja in the workplace, and it means allyship. Moving from being a bystander on these issues into learning how to be an upstander, learning what your roles are and how you can actually be effective at shifting the workplace to be more balanced, to hear the voices of women. So, for example, at a boardroom table, it's often the case where guys, because of their many being in the same room, can be more dominant and aggressive with conversation. But if you learn to set the tone of the meeting to allow for others to be heard, those who are silent or who don't have that kind of aggressive personality, to interject. But you make a space for them. Hey, say, Kelly, you're quiet here. How about you share what you think? And so it gives that opportunity to speak and then share those ideas. So it's not about trying to prevent men from being men. It's about, hey, we need to learn how, and the how-to is all that I talk about with my work. We need to learn how to create a space for women to engage with their approaches and their ideas to solutions so that they can be heard and collaboratively worked with and solve the issues that the company's facing.
I think some of what Mark Zuckerberg is suggesting is that his feeling is that it had gone too far. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that. Are there examples of when something that's meant to be inclusive has maybe gone too far? Do you have any thoughts on that, Kelly?
Sure. You may be referring to something that I have on my website. I experienced a time when I went to the university gym here, and they identified an hour for women only to be at the gym. And I thought, fantastic, this is great. Finally, I don't have to, have any concerns about guys Googling or whatever, which they often have signs up about not taking pictures and so forth. So I was like, this is great. It's got in there. And before the 5 minutes before that hour began, the big windows that are on two walls of the gym, which by the way is on the second floor, they started closing all the blinds. And I said, so that happened a couple of times when I went, and so I finally went up to the manager there and I said, hey, what's going on with these blinds going down? And they said, well, we have a certain group in our university that the Muslim community isn't comfortable with being seen when they're working out. And so we have to shut it down. And I said, well, that's not fair. Like, we want the sunshine. Like, it takes enough to get to the gym as it is here. Like, we're on the second floor. It faces 2 parking lots. Like, surely we can figure this out. Like, if you want to put some film up on the lower part of the window so we can at least still have lights, have a blind below, certain, but nope, they had to do the whole thing. And I thought, that's going too far for me. I want to have this experience as well. And I think we need to be aware that it has to be an outcome or a solution that works for everybody and not have one group override the other. So
tricky,
that's
though.
where I found it a bit. Yeah, it is tricky. Yeah. But it is important. Like, there are options, right? There are options. You can move certain equipment away from those windows. You can, like I said, put on this film on the windows that still provides the light. There are options, but we're not doing that. We're just making a clear no.
I want to go. Go ahead. I'll let you finish. Go ahead, Kelly.
Yeah, the other aspect to that experience was before the time started for the 1 hour, everybody had to leave the gym. And then the women had to line up outside and be brought back in. And I'm like, this is crazy. Why can't we just stay? Mm-hmm. Or like, well, some guys just don't leave. I'm like, really? Like, we're at least 18 years old here. Can we not just be getting this? You just want to have someone walk around. It's not a big place. And hey, buddy, you got to go. It's time. But no, that's an issue. So it's like, okay, this is a little silly to me. But anyway.
But knowing your background, I mean, that is interesting how you took that and just sort of the questions it raises. And I do want to go around the table, and then we've got somebody on the line who wants to share their perspective. But Abdur, I'll put that question to you. You listened to Kelly's example there, but I do wonder if there has ever been a time where you felt maybe DEI has gone too far. Like, how are you wrestling with some of those questions of what that line is?
Well, again, I think there are a few perspectives to that. First of all, there's an element called design thinking also. As Kelly was saying, they could have had, you can always have more effective process and procedures also, like the window panes or anything would have been a good design, process. Fine. Whenever these things have gone out, I've always seen that it's more like, lazy solutions to people's problems also. We're going to do something about you. We're going to just show it more as a check item and not really deeply think about, who you're serving for, who is it for. And I've always seen in these kind of situations also, and I was listening to Mark Zuckerberg, masculinity also. If in my perspective and the culture and the values that I've seen in other cultures also, and in the Canadian context, if you really embrace your masculinity, no woman should ever feel unsafe. Rather in any boardroom or meeting room, workplace or something. So there is definitely that problem also. It's a problem of relationships and trust also. And I've seen this many times, that lack of emotional intelligence, that lack of empathy and connection where the other person is coming from, and not having that capacity to listen, to understand what people are saying. I'm talking about listening, not responding back.
Right.
So it's really, when we talk about it at workplaces also, and now that we as a Saskatchewan, as a community, we are embracing the world global challenges also. We have solutions here, so we're not talking about our community. We need to have the diverse perspectives, but for that to happen, we need to have those basic human skills of listening, communicating, understanding. And that is the kind of the challenge also with the new workforce and the future of the work also. Those are the kind of the skills that businesses are looking for.
Right.
So diversity is really a solution for innovation, and the effect and the impact. I always joke that if you need to increase your revenue by 20-30%, EDI is one way to do that, because it makes you practice those skills. Yeah.
Tynan, what do you think? And I do want to just add another thing into this conversation, because it came out in some of the online chatter about Facebook's move to end its DEI program. A lot of people were saying, okay, well, Facebook's no longer putting tampons in men's bathrooms. And then that thing, that tampons in men's bathrooms, has come up a lot. It even came up in Canadian politics because Jenny Byrne, who is an advisor to Pierre Poilievre, had a back and forth with Erin O'Toole, suggesting that Erin O'Toole supported a Liberal who was for DEI policies, including tampons in men's bathrooms. So the conversation is interesting, but I do wonder, Tynan, from your perspective, are there any examples of when it's maybe gone too far, or just what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't doubt that it has gone too far in some spaces. We're generally bad at defining things and then setting clear boundaries around things. And you think about masculinity as one of those topics. Well, what is masculinity, Mark Zuckerberg? Why didn't you go into all of the things that you think it means? Because I'm sure a lot of the things that you think it means are not what some people think it means. And sometimes when you think about a lot of sport culture or just deep masculine cultures, those involve disparaging comments towards women. I don't think that that's what masculinity is, but some people might. And I don't think Mark Zuckerberg means that either. But it doesn't mean that sometimes we don't need to talk about those things. And what I also think is so interesting about DEI work is oftentimes it's positioned, and this is sometimes where I do think it goes too far, it's positioned as a battle against white men. I don't believe in that. I believe that, yes, many white men have positions of power and a ton of power in our society, and there's not as a balance, and we need to achieve more of a balance, but also that the harmful things, harmful thoughts about masculinity, these sorts of policies, they harm men as well. And I just think about, the usage of parental leave, for example. If you look at Stats Can, 77% of people that birth, children take parental leave. Only 9% of men take parental leave. Well, that is harming most men in their relationship with their child and probably does damage to their family unit. But I would say that probably a really strong reason why parental leave is not used, and Dr. Rachel Pettigrew out of Mount Royal University does some excellent work on this as well. And she talks about when you look at internal company culture dynamics surrounding men taking parental leave, there is incredible shame. There are comments made about are you really a man if you're going to take off leave? Those sorts of things are still so pervasive in many organizations. Well, why wouldn't a man want to have a policy and someone thinking at their company about those sorts of things because it benefits them? Think about mental health and part of often common masculinity is that it's not okay to talk about your feelings. And look at the suicide rates amongst men. They're astronomical. That is harmful to men. And DEI is trying to fight against those sorts of things, which is actually helping white men or men in general.
We got an email from Kevin, and this is very much a response to the clip we played of Mark Zuckerberg. Kevin writes, as a man who works in a welding shop, a stereotypically male-dominated work environment, Zuckerberg's comments sound like nonsense. I don't feel like less of a man just because the expectation at work is to treat people with respect. That's my main issue with this concept of a return to masculinity or eliminating DEI. To me, it seems like a coded way of saying, I don't want to have to think about the ways that my behavior affects people around me. We are seeing some organizations, and I think, Kelly, you're kind of in this right now, but changing some of the language around what these inclusive and diversity programs, the language that's used, and I want to get to that. So I want to acknowledge that, I think we've seen a change at the University of Alberta, so we'll talk about that, but I'll go to a caller quickly who wants to get in on the conversation. So Colleen joins us right now in Saskatoon. Hi, Colleen.
Oh, good morning. Hello, Saskatchewan, blue sky. I think Colin Powell, first of all, America has lost its identity. I didn't really want to tune into the speech, but there weren't very many brown people in that crowd. I counted 2, but knowing one of them by name, by Vivek or whatever, who is also on his way out. But Colin Powell, in the past, he said in his leadership position, he said, when I give somebody something to do, I don't tell them how to do it. I give that recruit their own agency to come up with their own solutions on how to do it. So that's welcoming, diversion of thought. The other one is children in poverty have a higher resting blood pressure. So I encourage, that Native people have a greater portion of the employment. But one of my games that I do with a youth group is, or I suggest to have done, excuse me, I am on the radio.
Mm-hmm. And I'm listening to what you're saying. So keep going.
No, my daughter was distracting me. So anyway, make two groups, two teams, and give them a dexterous thing to do, like putting a ball down a tube. And then at the last minute say, okay, and you Team A, you go ahead, and Team B, you put on these oven mitts, and you try to do that same thing.
Yeah. Trying to illustrate how we don't all start from the same point, right?
Well, and that's the barriers and the oppressions and the unseen things that come up. And Mark Zuckerberg, he's got an Asian wife, so he's about to have God bless him and his family, maybe a biracial child. So he will learn more if he's lucky enough to become a father of a biracial child. I didn't intend
to make the whole show about Mark Zuckerberg, but he's definitely going through some things with his gold chain and his haircut, his curly hair, and the jiu-jitsu. So no surprise that we've paid a lot of attention to what he's doing. Colleen, thanks for calling.
And it was on MLK Jr. Day. Like, that was, again, the universe giving a wink. Like, look what's happening. Like, one of the most threatening presidents is going into the White House and assuming his position of power on MLK Jr. Day.
Yeah.
Like, that was one of the... Yep, okay.
Colleen, thank you. Thank you so much, Colleen. That was Colleen joining us in Saskatoon. You can call us too. We've got a few minutes left on the show here, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. You're welcome to ask our guests a question if there's something that you're not understanding about DEI, or even if you're wrestling it with yourself, like at your workplace. Feel free to call and we can engage in a conversation. Or you can email us, bluesky@cbc.ca. Okay, so we have talked a lot about Mark Zuckerberg. We've talked a lot about the American companies that are pulling back on their DEI programs. But what are we seeing in Canada? And Tynan, I know you've put some thought into this with what's going on at the University of Alberta and the fact that you, I think, just moved to back to Regina from Edmonton. But tell us what's happening there. They're changing the language of what the program's called, right?
Yeah, well, and I love that the guest had mentioned Reverend Dr. Bernice King. In her speech on MLK Day, she said, "Let me be clear, to be woke is to be aware of oppression and committed to justice. And this ain't no threat. This is not a threat to America, but a reflection of America's highest ideals." And so I just wanted to share that because I have, profound respect for Reverend Dr. Bernice King. That said, and I think we can apply that to Canada, and I'm partly American. My dad's from Texas, but I grew up here. When we think about University of Alberta and their president gave a statement in an op-ed about things that they're doing to change. I'm not threatened at all by the changes that they're making. They are going away from EDI language. They're moving to access, community, and belonging. And there's no question that sometimes this term, this acronym of EDI, DEI, IDEA, there's a bunch of acronyms that are used, but they are polarizing and they can be a distraction. And sometimes even those who do this work are distracted by this. And I think that there's more important work to be done than to sit and debate the terminology, but more about serving people and, doing justice work like Dr. Bernice King talks about. And so the University of Alberta has an amazing track record of putting things together. They have one of the largest attended, MOOCs. I can't even remember what that acronym means, but, the online courses. And that's the Indigenous course. And they have educated thousands and thousands of people around the world on matters of indigeneity. That's incredibly important.
Isn't that the one that the Schitt's Creek actor?
Exactly. Yes, Stan Levy. Promoted it, and I there's evidence, sure, of every university institution making mistakes in their work with Indigenous peoples, and of course we all have room to grow in that area specifically, of course, but I don't see any indication of the U of A changing it in a bad way. I think that they're adapting. They're being smart. They're recognizing that, a basic tenet of change management is that sometimes you have to be adaptable and you have to understand your audience. And I think Kelly said that too, right? Meeting people where they're at. Of course, if you're meeting people where they're at and they're hateful, chauvinistic people that don't want to be in, the presence of a woman, that is a completely different story than what Kelly and I and Adver are talking about here. We're talking about recognizing that we don't have the same experiences, that we do have to, have different meetings of minds and go at this a little bit slower sometimes, or change our process, and that's okay.
So, I just want to remind people that, the U of A is now calling it access, community, belonging. Kelly, how are you grappling with this? And are you changing the terminology at all in the work that you're doing?
Yes, for sure. So right now I'm leading a North American initiative, so it's in the forest sector. And of course, a lot of these companies are based in the US. So sort of an obvious thing we had to change. So we're talking workplace culture. Okay. And I like using that phrase because it encompasses more aspects to the conversation that I think we can start including white men in on as part of inclusion. And what I mean by that is the mental health aspects that my colleague here on the show has referred to. I think it was Tynan. Mm-hmm. Because they do have troubles with work-life balance that they don't have a voice in. And they do follow the pack most often in a sector-wide basis. I've seen it. And so what I've noticed is that women are kind of the targets for bringing up this conversation, but men actually benefit. So for example, when I've dealt with, I've gotten quite obviously involved with one sector. So I have that challenging traditional workplace culture experience to share. But I know that when and it's probably the same with mining lately, because I haven't been as involved with them lately, but when you're off site and there's issues that happen with women on camps, for example, harassment, right? But they also happen with men. And that isn't really often discussed, and men don't often share that. But through giving these safe spaces, and I know some people are like, I don't like hearing about safe spaces, but it's true. Psychological safety includes the space to come forward with your issues. And when you're dealing with a pack mentality environment, that's hard to do. And so creating that space within this workplace culture umbrella term and having that as part of the conversation may be the silver bullet to get people all in an understanding we have to address issues for everybody. And also by doing so, we're able to just move the needle forward collectively and inclusively, in an inclusive way, so that this conversation can move forward, because we have this pendulum swinging thing, right? It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So,
which is actually, because Abdur, you mentioned that when we were walking into the studio, that there's always been these waves, right? Waves of acceptance and momentum. And then I think I've heard the term retrenchment, right? It's like we're kind of in that period of seeing that backlash. Abdur, I want to go to you next, because I know that you're interested in solutions. And so what are you thinking about in this moment, and how, we heard what Kelly's doing, changing language and trying to be, paying attention to what men in the workplace might need. What are your thoughts on some solutions as we try to find a way forward?
I think I totally align with the solutions Kelly and my other colleague Regina mentioned. And in terms of this is where you as an EDI practitioner, you put your behavioral science hat on, your marketing hat on, your leadership hat on. And I'm double down on, yes, we can always change the packaging, but the principles will remain the same, right? No matter how as long as we are humans, we have a heart, we have a spirit, those principles will remain the same. And I was even using the buzzword culture for a long time in the last 7-8 years ago, because again, sometimes words can be, how the culture manages. So I'm all about the work culture also, but I'm also doubling down on how to create high-performing teams.
High-performing teams.
Yes, highly effective, high-performing teams. And one of the basic principles is all around diversity and trust and psychological safety. So how you deliver it and connect with people. I am also very clear. This work is not for everyone or every business. But the businesses are going to embrace it. They're going to attract all the right talent. They're going to prosper because as we embrace diversity of problems, we need diversity of solutions also. And that can only come with the people and the workplaces and the ecosystem that we create on campuses or in our workplaces and the ripple effect. So that is kind of my why and how I see this as a great opportunity. It's scary. It needs courage also, but we need our community also. And this is for everyone, regardless of your color, gender orientation, everything. And that is the challenge with EDI work also. We always think about people of color. We need to focus on our people who have visible and invisible disabilities also. So the impact is huge. We're talking about many, many people. And so, yeah, I'm really all about high-performing team and culture. And let's have some fun and dance together because that is how we're going to look at the
Okay,
future.
we're ending it there. That was lovely.
Love that. That's so good.
Yeah, I mean, I came into the studio feeling a bit of heaviness, right? Like this was going to be a big show. This is a challenging topic. There's a lot going on. And I've really appreciated your thoughts and the time that you gave us today. So, Tynan, thank you.
You bet. Thank you. And I agree with these colleagues in that these words sometimes do, not mean as much as we give them. They're important. They're so important. But again, human resources, culture, leadership, these are other great words that have existed as umbrella terms for maybe these specific concepts. My business is called culturing.com. That's on purpose because I want to see it as that. And when I started it almost 10 years ago, that was where the focus was. That's where the focus remains today. Sometimes I've had to adapt my vernacular to understand where things are going, and that's just great. So thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you, Tynan. And Kelly, so good to have you as part of this too. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you to both of you, and I'm going to send you an email. We need to go out for coffee. We start the discussion.
See you in Saskatoon.
Virtual coffee.
Thanks, guys. I'm Leisha Grebinski. You've been listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1, 94.1 FM in Saskatoon, 102.5 FM in Regina. Well, with all this uncertainty in the world right now, the news cycle can be a lot. So tomorrow, we're taking refuge from all of it and focusing our attention on the power of plants. Yes, we're going to hear from a couple of floral conservatories and how they can help our mental health.